Self-esteem does not collapse in one day, nor is it built in one moment of praise. It is quietly shaped in the unseen chambers of the psyche, where thoughts repeat themselves like prayers and judgments become habits. According to Carl Jung, the greatest danger to self-esteem is not failure, rejection, or criticism, but unconsciousness. A person who does not know themselves becomes a hostage to the opinions, projections, and expectations of others. This story is about such a person, not named, because Jung believed that what is unconscious is universal, and the journey belongs to anyone who dares to look inward. In the beginning, the person lived outwardly well. There was work, conversation, ambition, and the appearance of confidence. Yet inside, something was always tightening, as if an invisible hand were squeezing the chest whenever approval was delayed or criticism appeared. A simple look of disinterest from another could ruin an entire day. Praise felt intoxicating, but short-lived, like water poured into a cracked vessel. The more the person tried to be liked, respected, and admired, the more fragile the inner sense of worth became. Jung would have said that the ego had been built on borrowed ground. Self-esteem collapses when the ego mistakes external validation for inner value. Jung warned that when a person identifies too strongly with their persona, the social mask worn to function in society, they lose contact with their true self. The persona is useful, but it is not who you are. When self-esteem depends on the persona, it rises and falls with applause and rejection. The person in this story had unknowingly made this mistake. Their sense of worth was rented from the outside world, and the rent was due every day. One day, exhaustion appeared. Not physical exhaustion, but psychological fatigue. The constant effort to be acceptable, impressive, and agreeable began to feel unbearable. Jung believed that such fatigue is not weakness, but a signal from the unconscious. The psyche rebels when it is ignored for too long. Self-esteem cannot survive if it is constantly negotiated with others. The person began to sense that something essential had been abandoned, though they could not yet name it. At first, the instinct was to try harder, work more, speak better, improve image. But the emptiness remained. Jung would have recognized this as the moment when the old strategy fails, forcing the psyche toward individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who you are rewarded for being. Self-esteem, in Jung's view, is not confidence. It is alignment. It arises when a person lives in accordance with their inner truth, even when that truth is inconvenient. Gradually, attention turned inward. Not through dramatic insight, but through quiet discomfort. Why did criticism hurt so deeply? Why did comparison feel unavoidable? Why did success never feel enough? Jung taught that when emotional reactions are disproportionate, they point to unconscious complexes. A complex is an emotionally charged cluster of thoughts, memories, and beliefs formed early in life. Self-esteem is often wounded not by present events, but by old, unresolved experiences that continue to speak through the present. The person began to observe rather than react. When shame appeared, instead of pushing it away, they watched it. When insecurity rose, instead of masking it with arrogance or humor, they allowed it to exist. This was difficult because the ego prefers control and observation feels like surrender. But Jung believed that consciousness itself has healing power. What you bring into awareness no longer controls you from the shadows. One of the most painful discoveries was the shadow. Jung described the shadow as the parts of the personality that are rejected, denied, or disowned. Traits deemed unacceptable, weakness, envy, selfishness, anger, are pushed into the unconscious. But what is denied does not disappear. It returns indirectly, often attacking self-esteem from within. The person realized that much of their self-criticism came from their own shadow. They judged themselves harshly because they had never accepted their own imperfections. Protecting self-esteem, Jung would say, does not mean thinking highly of yourself. It means making peace with your totality. The moment you try to be only good, only strong, only admirable, you declare war on half of your psyche. The person had spent years trying to be flawless, and in doing so had become fragile. Any hint of failure threatened the entire identity. As the shadow was acknowledged, something unexpected happened. Self-esteem did not increase immediately, but it stabilized. There was less panic, less urgency to prove, less fear of exposure. Jung believed that humility, not humiliation, but humility, is essential for psychological strength. A person who knows their darkness is not easily shattered by criticism because they are no longer pretending to be light alone. Another realization followed. Much of the person's self-esteem had been damaged by projection. Projection occurs when we attribute our own unconscious qualities to others. The person constantly imagined judgment, disapproval, and superiority in those around them. Jung taught that what disturbs us in others often reveals something unresolved within ourselves. The fear of being seen as inadequate was projected outward, making the world feel hostile and evaluative. When projection is withdrawn, self-esteem gains a natural shield. The person began to see that not every look was judgment, not every silence rejection, not every disagreement a verdict on their worth. This reduced emotional noise. Self-esteem does not need to be defended when it is no longer constantly attacked by imagined enemies. Slowly, a new relationship with failure emerged. Jung viewed failure not as an enemy of self-esteem, but as its teacher. The ego wants success to confirm worth. The self, the deeper organizing principle of the psyche, uses failure to realign the personality. The person noticed that moments of failure revealed what truly mattered and what had been pursued merely for validation. When goals aligned with inner values rather than external rewards, effort felt meaningful even without recognition. Comparison, once obsessive, lost some of its grip. Jung warned that comparison is a symptom of disconnection from one's own path. When a person does not know who they are becoming, they measure themselves against others to find orientation. Self-esteem suffers because comparison always ignores context, inner struggle, and individual destiny. As the person became more aware of their own inner direction, others' achievements felt less threatening. Another key shift occurred around responsibility. Jung believed that self-esteem grows when a person takes responsibility for their inner life rather than blaming circumstances or people. The person stopped expecting others to provide reassurance, understanding, or validation. This was not bitterness, it was maturity. Self-esteem strengthened because it was no longer outsourced. There were setbacks. Old habits returned under stress. The need for approval resurfaced in moments of uncertainty. But Jung emphasized that psychological growth is spiral, not linear. Returning to old patterns does not erase progress. It reveals deeper layers. Each time insecurity appeared, it was met with awareness rather than self-contempt. This alone protected self-esteem from collapse. One of the most liberating insights was the distinction between worth and performance. Jung believed that modern society dangerously confuses the two. When self-esteem depends on productivity, usefulness, or achievement, it becomes conditional. The person learned to separate who they were from what they did. Mistakes no longer felt like character flaws. Rest no longer felt like laziness. Silence no longer felt like insignificance. The inner voice changed. Where there had once been harsh judgment, there was now dialogue. Jung taught that the psyche speaks in symbols, emotions, and inner figures. By listening rather than suppressing, the person developed an inner ally rather than an inner enemy. Self-esteem does not require constant positivity, it requires fairness. Being fair to yourself is one of the strongest forms of self-respect. As time passed, relationships changed, not because others changed, but because the person no longer approached them from a place of deficiency. Jung warned that low self-esteem often leads to emotional dependence, manipulation, or resentment. When self-esteem stabilized, relationships became less transactional. Approval was appreciated but not needed. Disapproval was uncomfortable but not devastating. The person also learned the value of solitude. Jung famously said that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. By spending time alone without distraction, the person encountered their own thoughts without judgment. This strengthened inner authority. Self-esteem flourishes when you can stand alone without abandoning yourself. Eventually, a quiet confidence emerged. Not arrogance, not bravado, just an inner steadiness. The kind that does not announce itself. Jung would have called this the ego's proper relationship with the self. When the ego stops trying to dominate or please and begins to listen, self-esteem becomes a byproduct of integrity. Criticism still came, failure still occurred, uncertainty still existed, but these no longer defined identity. Self-esteem was no longer something to be protected aggressively. It was something rooted deeply enough to endure storms. The person understood that protecting self-esteem does not mean avoiding pain. It means not betraying yourself in response to pain.